So I would like to welcome John Makransky, who very kindly has agreed to come back to visit our II, and not only that, give this series of talks on awakening the qualities of Buddha nature. So John, he has been a pillar of support and guidance and insight since the Center for Buddhist Studies at our II was founded. He has been our senior academic advisor in all these years, and come in person to visit on several occasions. He has met with Chogyam Rinpoche during his retreats in America, and John has been active as a Buddhist studies scholar, helping to sort of reshape the field of Buddhist studies over the last few decades. He has introduced the concept of Buddhist theology in an exciting way a long time ago, in a way that still inspires many of us. And he has focused on care and compassion, kindness, and the role that these qualities play on the spiritual path in the Buddhist tradition and in life in general, because he has also been a teacher who has sort of opened and developed interfaces with the world in general, independent of our spiritual, religious, philosophical backgrounds. He has helped create some ways that everyone can connect with Buddhist teaching, Buddhist wisdom. So he is a student of Chogyam Rinpoche's for many years, and in his approach, he relies on meditation instructions that come from the Kagyu Nyingma schools, and then combines that also recently with scientific understanding of things, like in the case of his new book, which comes out in a couple of months, I think, yeah. Psychology, attachment theory, and neuroscience. He combines that with Buddhist insights, and something interesting happens. So I recommend that book. I've had a peek already, so very exciting stuff. He has done this thing together with Paul Condon. So in many ways, it's a great pleasure to welcome John Makransky. I look forward to your words and your instructions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Thomas. So I want to thank Thomas and Diane Denis and Shireen Patel and all who work to support the activity of Rangjung Yeshe Institute, and of course, much gratitude to Chogyam Rinpoche for all of his activity, which is kind of unfathomable. I'm going to begin with a refuge bodhicitta prayer, which actually will be quite connected to my talk. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and supreme spiritual community, I go for refuge into full enlightenment. By the power of bodhicitta and all six perfections, may I realize Buddhahood for the sake of all beings. In many ways, that's going to be the foundation of my talk, is that kind of prayer. So I need to give just a little bit of background and then we'll get into it, okay? My glasses seem to be fogging up for some reason spontaneously. So please don't be distracted by that. I just need some kind of windshield wipers for these. So back in the 1980s, it was the last century, I was a young practicing Buddhist graduate student studying Buddhahood for my PhD dissertation, which is a remarkable topic for a PhD dissertation. My older brother once, when he heard about that way back then, said, "Johnny, only you could be arrogant enough to take the nature of God for your PhD dissertation." But I had a lot of help. So I was studying about the Buddhakayas, Buddha Jnanas, forms of awareness, Buddha qualities, Buddha activities. And I studied these things at the Central Tibetan Institute in Sarnath in India for a period of time. My wife was there with me, and I studied there with several different Tibetan teachers that I found deeply inspiring, Khenpos, Lamas, and Geshes, who were all teaching at that Tibetan Institute in Sarnath. And with them, I learned textual, philosophical materials on Buddhahood in various Tibetan commentaries, and I was studying the Indian commentaries that they were drawing from and many Mahayana sutras. And all that study also was informing my Buddhist practice, which was really the main motivation for why I was doing it. And there was one teacher in particular, I'll just mention very briefly, so we don't have a lot of time. His name was Geshe Thupten Tsering. And I tend to tear up a little bit when I even think of him. My wife put it best. She said that I said I was going to mention Geshe Thupten Tsering, who was at that Tibetan Institute. And my wife said, Geshe Thupten Tsering, she said, I don't know a lot of deep philosophy, but he was simply the kindest, most gentle person I had ever met in my life. And Geshe Thupten Tsering was also considered really one of the most brilliant scholars at the Tibetan Institute. At that time, the principal was Samdong Rinpoche. And he was also by far the most popular teacher. And there are many stories I could tell about him, but that's enough for now. But it's just an example what I mean by inspiring teachers with whom I was studying qualities of Buddhahood. So it was not just the content of these textual studies, but also the quality of these teachers' presence to me that over time gradually clarified something for me about the Mahayana Vajrayana worldview that I was both learning about and also increasingly inhabiting myself. And that is a simple statement. From the perspective of that kind of worldview, we sentient beings are and always have been held in absolute, unconditional, and unchanging compassion and wisdom, long before we realized that was happening, by all who have awakened before us, all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And this actually is part of what awakening means, and therefore part of what refuge in the Buddha and realized Sangha means. In other words, the qualities of awakening that we seek are already here, because we are held in them right now by all who have awakened before us. And when we generate the mind of bodhicitta to whatever degree, we are aspiring to become a co-holder of that great holding environment of absolute, unchanging, and unconditional love, compassion, and wisdom, pervading the entire world, holding all beings until each one is ready to recognize the deep nature of their mind and become deeply free and well. And that, in the introduction of my dissertation, was the purpose I gave for it. I wanted to understand better what refuge meant when we take refuge in the Buddha, and I wanted to understand better what generating bodhicitta meant. What are we aspiring to become? And I think I did learn something there. So this has been the devotional starting point of Buddhist practice for millions of Asian Buddhists for millennia, and it was now becoming a foundation of my own practice. Over the past few decades, I've been exploring ways to make this kind of traditional devotional starting point for Buddhist practice, that is, the understanding and the ritual and contemplative practicing into the increasingly deepening experience that you are literally held in absolute qualities and powers of awakening. You have been long before it ever occurred to you that that could have been happening, long before anyone ever talked about it. That devotional starting point, which is foundational across all of Asia and has been through the history of Buddhism, I've sought over the past maybe 25 years to try to make something like that starting point of practice, that sense of deep refuge, accessible to more and more people. So, and in particular, three groups of people. And I have to say this at the beginning because it structures how I do what I do. One of those groups of people that I'm speaking to and writing to, and also in this talk, are we might call modern Buddhists or Western Buddhists, but of course some of them are also Asian, but urban Asian. Many of whom have felt distant from the devotional power of Asian Buddhist traditions that they are drawing from in their practices, or haven't even encountered Buddhist devotional practices in their modernized forms of meditation. Following so far? That's the first group. The second group of people that I speak and write for are people of other religions who seek a rather deep experiential encounter with Buddhism that is more than intellectual and more than just more discussions. Some kind of an encounter that could deeply empower their own spiritualities in light of Buddhism, and from which they might feel very grateful that the Buddha came into the world, even as Christians, Jews, contemplative Muslims, and contemplative Hindus. The third group is for people in many kinds of caring roles and professions: health caregivers, teachers, social workers, therapists, psychiatrists, who seek a much fuller power of love and compassion and wisdom for their lives and work for others in need. Like a sincere wish to really access more unconditional, a more grounded power of compassion and whatever wisdom it is that supports that, even though they're not particularly attracted to religion, some of them. Many others are, actually. These are intersecting groups then. So clear so far? That's who I'm speaking to. I think it includes everyone in this room, too. I'm going to draw here especially on Nyingma and Kagyu traditions in the attempt to adapt the kind of devotional starting point for practice in these traditions into a form that that might help make it more accessible to people in those three groups, and perhaps even for some of us. The focus of exploration here will be Buddha nature. That is, how deepening receptivity to qualities of our Buddha nature may help us begin to align with it. And that's often the way I gloss devotional practice. I don't use the word devotional in most of my writing or teaching among these groups. Many modern people are allergic to the word, but I will use ways of developing deepening receptivity to qualities of awakening. One Tibetan Dzogchen teacher, Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche, speaking of our Buddha nature, wrote, quote, "Unbounded space is a great gift. Infinite awareness is a great gift. And natural spontaneous warmth is a great gift. And these gifts are already in us at this moment. As you recognize this, you come to know this, and this knowing becomes the greatest resource in your life." Unquote. So this basic space of our being is undivided from powers of awakening. Powers or qualities of love, compassion, awareness, tranquility, simplicity, wisdom, and more. And that is our Buddha nature. And these powers are always available below our surface consciousness, but have been obstructed by our habits of thought and reaction, our karmic patterns. So how to access these underlying powers of our Buddha nature? From a Tibetan Buddhist perspective, we need to wean the mind from its tendency to identify so fully with narrow thoughts of self and other that shut down the underlying powers of our Buddha nature. Then how to do that? Through forms of practice that bring out capacities of our Buddha nature as powers of warmth, loving energy, compassion, insight, responsiveness, creativity, that help the mind release its self-grasping narrowness and relax into the infinite openness, lucidity, and warmth of its Buddha nature, to find refuge there for oneself and for others. From the perspective of Nyingma Kagyu traditions, then, the basic function of all practices is to interrupt or disrupt self-grasping habits of mind by tapping into underlying qualities of our Buddha nature, to let those qualities help reunite us with that nature, and from there to make us much more fully present to others. Okay, so far? You don't have to agree when I say that. I just mean following along, okay? Now, many forms of contemplative training in Buddhist traditions perform this function of interrupting the self-grasping patterns of mind by evoking powers of our Buddha nature. In Tibetan Buddhism, for example, of course, as many of you are familiar, this includes trainings in mindfulness, Ngundro, the four immeasurable attitudes, cultivation of bodhicitta, shamatha, vipassana, vajrayana practices, mahamudra, and dzogchen, and more. Embedded in these forms of Tibetan practice, or assumed as a background for their possibility, is a relational structure that grounds all practice, which I alluded to at the beginning of this talk. A relational structure that grounds all practice, meaning we do not begin any of these practices with the understanding that we are just alone, on our own, trying desperately to get enlightened, as if unrelated to all those who have realized enlightenment before us. The door of entry into all such Buddhist practices is the practice of refuge, which opens us to the enlightened power of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and the power of the Dharma that they embody and transmit. And that empowers us to follow in their footsteps. Those who have come before us have been empowering us to follow in their footsteps beginninglessly. But some of us are just beginning to become aware of that possibility. We first encounter the power and reality of Buddha nature in those who have actualized it before us. When someone embodies the qualities of their Buddha nature, unconditional love, compassion, wisdom, deep peace, and so forth, if we are receptive to the power of their presence with those qualities, it helps evoke our corresponding capacity to experience those qualities and to learn to embody them. Okay? That's why all Buddhist traditions begin with the Buddha, and following that, many others who realized what the Buddha taught. So Tibetan practitioners bring to mind the Buddha or a field of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, lineage teachers as an enlightened field of refuge, a field of unconditional care. So they experience themselves in their world held in the power of the Buddha's all-pervasive love, compassion, wisdom, which brings out their corresponding capacities of appreciation, gratitude, warmth, compassion, and wisdom. As Dogo Khyentse Rinpoche said, the warmth of the Buddha's wisdom and compassion can melt the ore of our being to release the gold of the Buddha nature within. Tibetans also bring to mind the deep loving kindness of their mothers and other loving figures in their lives, and let the power of that evoke their innate capacities of warmth, appreciation, and love, which they learn then to extend to all beings as radiant energies of love and compassion. In Tibetan Buddhist ritual contemplative practices, the energies and qualities of love, compassion, and wisdom evoked by such fields of refuge are drawn on in meditation to help the mind settle into the source of these awakening qualities, the basic space, pure awareness, and warmth of our Buddha nature, from which to recognize others in their deep nature, their Buddha nature, and hold them in unconditional warmth and compassion. That's the basic pattern of Tibetan Buddhism, in my view. We are held in something. We are held in a great power of awakening long before we realized it. And when we begin to acknowledge that, deeply accept it, and allow it to empower our own capacities of our deep nature, the aspiration can then increasingly emerge to join them, to join them. This is not the pattern of practice of an isolated individual self trying desperately to do something called get awakened. That is not the fundamental pattern of any Buddhist tradition, or actually any religious tradition that I know. So in sum, to experience ourselves and our world is held in the love, compassion, wisdom of our field of care, which is outer refuge, helps us settle into the source of those qualities in the depth of our being, which is inner refuge, and from there to sense others in the depth of their being and to extend unconditional love and compassion for them. And this is the pattern of practice we'll engage in this session. Okay? Why not? This is also in psychology, one of the most studied, researched, and established theories in developmental psychology is called attachment theory. And this actually is the very pattern of attachment theory in current psychology. That is, to phrase it in a very simple way, the implication of attachment theory is we need to experience what it's like to be held in warmth and love in order to grow into a human being who can hold others in warmth and love. Otherwise, we cannot. Is that clear? It's a profound correlation between part of modern psychology and the whole history of Buddhist and other religious traditions. So in our meditations in this session, we're going to establish a field of care. I call it a field of care. You'll see why in a minute. Basically a field of refuge that provides a way to begin to access qualities from the depth of our awareness, from our Buddha nature. And I'm going to offer 3 options to help different people of different backgrounds, certainly for Buddhists, but also for people of other religious traditions who may be here, and also those who are skeptical of religion or not interested in religion, but really attracted somehow to the kinds of qualities we're talking about. 3 options to help different people of these different kinds of background each find their own best point of entry into this practice. Okay? Now I'm going to describe these 3 options very briefly, and as I do so, I'm going to ask you to please kind of settle kind of meditatively into each as I describe it. Just be a few sentences each, okay? The first option for establishing a field of care, which will be the main starting point of the meditation, is bring to mind your field of care. So what's that? Well, one kind of field of care, first option, is what I call re-inhabiting a caring moment. So try now to recall a moment with another person or animal that just makes you happy to recall. Try to really do that right now. A moment with another person, or it could be a pet, or someone else's pet, that just makes you happy to recall right now. Or feels heartwarming or uplifting to recall. A moment perhaps when someone was seeing you in your deep worth, or really listening to you at that moment, or radiating warmth, kindness to you, or just happy to be with you. You could feel that. Or rooting for you. Could be even a moment of snuggling with a child or a pet. Makes you happy to recall. And now comes the key part of this. Can everybody recall something? Try. When you recall that, now re-inhabit that caring moment as if it's happening right now. Not as a memory. That moment is now. You are in it. Feel it. Relax into it. Accept it. Okay? Second option. This involves bringing to mind what I call a benefactor. And that someone you're truly grateful has been in your life or in your world. So now we're not just thinking of one simple moment, but of a person. It's kind of moving for you to bring to mind, kind of like with me and Geshe Thupten Tsering and some of my other teachers, or my wife or my son. But bring to mind a benefactor, someone you're truly grateful has been in your life or in your world. So someone whose presence or way of being or mentorship or part of their writing or music or art somehow profoundly inspires you. You feel like it blesses you, it uplifts you, it empowers you. And imagine that person is present here with you now, really seeing you and communing with you in your deep worth, dignity, and capacity, and blessing you with care and wisdom. Imagine that person is here now, like that, and just commune with them and feel how that is. Okay, and the third option, this is for someone who's practicing within a spiritual tradition. I call this bringing to mind your spiritual field. It's yours. Bring to mind, for example, the presence of the Buddha, or another spiritual figure that's profoundly inspiring and connecting, empowering for you, or an assembly of figures from your practice tradition that you experience as holding you and your whole world in unconditional love, compassion, and wisdom. And imagine them present here with you now, radiating, unchanging, all-embracing love, compassion, and wisdom. For real. Actually holding you and your whole world in that way. And let yourself and your world be held. Feel how that is. Your spiritual field could also be the natural world. Drawing you into the depth of your being, like with the sunset sky or Himalayan snow peak range, a forest or an ocean. So take a moment, just a moment now to consider these three options: a caring moment, a benefactor figure in your life, or a spiritual field. Of course, they may overlap, that's fine, but pick one. And which is most effective right now to help you sense that you are seen and held in a field of warmth, love, care, acceptance, and compassion? Which of those options helps you make contact with that? And please use that option in the meditation that I'll lead, okay? Fair enough? So I need to just say one more thing, and then we'll start it. How do we practice with this meditation? We're going to start with just a little bit of breathing and then bring to mind our field of care and then kind of inhabit it as really present now. So the field of care we bring to mind is helping us to tune into the sense that we in our world are held in care. Not just imagining that or not just creating that impression, but tuning in and sensing it as actually already happening now. And to inhabit our field of care as present here now tunes us into the loving qualities of our Buddha nature. A felt sense of warmth, acceptance, loving energy, inner rest, well-being, openness, and so forth. When you start to experience qualities like I just named, just relax into those qualities, okay? That's the key point. When you start to experience qualities like that, just relax into them, letting them permeate your whole body and mind and world as a deeply healing, holding environment, holding every part of you in love, warmth, compassion, and every part of your world. A deeply healing, loving, holding environment. We just settle more and more into the feeling of the loving qualities permeating our being. As various thoughts come up, stories about various people in your life, or about your field of care, just let them go. The aim of this practice is to actually get a feeling for these qualities, which are qualities of our Buddha nature. That's important. And to learn to relax into them and let them make us more intimate with them. So stories in your mind may come up, just let them go, because it's not the point of the meditation. It's not those stories. Just relax them. Okay? Okay, so does anybody need to stretch a little bit in our place? That's where we are. Those of us over 70 usually do. Okay. So just sit in a relaxed, comfortable way, back straight. Eyes could be gazing gently downward. And then let's just come down from the thinking mind into the body. Just letting the gravity of the body help the mind to settle into it. Just relaxing into the body. And you can take a slow, deep breath, inhaling from the abdomen so it expands. And then exhaling slowly and completely, very gently. And relax for a moment before inhaling again, if you can. And then repeat, just inhaling so the abdomen expands. Exhaling slowly, completely. And relax for a moment before inhaling again on the out breath. Repeat a few times. Just in a gentle, relaxed way. And now let the breath just settle into its own natural flow while still breathing from the abdomen. So you feel the belly expand and contract with each breath. And let that feeling of the abdomen moving with the breath just draw you into that feeling more and more, breath by breath. Just feeling it more and more. The feeling of the body moving with the breath. As if the breath is meditating you. as if the breath is meditating you. And now you can bring to mind your field of care, whatever kind you chose. Your caring moment, or a benefactor figure in your life, or spiritual field. And bring this to mind not just as a memory, but as happening right here, right now. So you are being seen and held in deep care, compassion, acceptance, and warmth, beyond judgments. You are being seen and held right now in deep care, compassion, acceptance, and warmth, beyond any judgments. Try just to believe and feel that that's really happening. And just relax into this experience, steeping in its loving energies, feeling its tender qualities, and letting them infuse your whole being and your whole world. Accept these loving energies and qualities into your whole body, your whole mind, and your whole world. Just accepting them, allowing them to infuse your whole being as best you can. Every part of you loved in its very being. Every part of you and your world loved in its very being. Just allowing and accepting this loving resonance. And as thoughts and feelings arise, let them all be embraced completely in the utter warmth and acceptance of this loving environment. As thoughts or feelings or reactions arise, let them all just be embraced in the total warmth and acceptance of this loving environment. Letting all such thoughts and feelings find their own place in their own time and process themselves in their own way by just letting them all be in this loving environment. Finally, just let this healing environment of warmth and acceptance help your mind to just relax deeply, trust enough to just release all of its frameworks of meditation or concern. Let this loving environment help the mind to trust enough to just release all of its frameworks of meditation or concern. Let the mind just settle back a bit inwardly and come to rest in the background of its awareness, which is naturally wide open and luminous like a sunlit sky. Letting the mind settle back a bit inwardly and just come to rest in the background or ground of its awareness, which is naturally wide open and luminous. And let any thoughts and feelings that arise just metabolize themselves or process themselves within this sky-like openness of awareness by just letting it all be. Okay, good. Thank you. Now, I think that Deanne Denis, did she send out a meditation handout to people who registered for the course? Did you all get a meditation handout? No? Okay, well, maybe that will come. But this is meditation number 1 in that handout. And it's called Field of Care Meditation. It's kind of like Field of Refuge. So first we let some abdominal breath meditation help us get grounded. And then we bring to mind our field of care, sort of like a field of refuge, and re-inhabit it as happening now or as present now. And if we're bringing to mind a field of care that's effective for us, we'll start to experience qualities. We don't have to like work to experience them. Like when I think of Geshe Thupten Tsering, I experience some qualities, especially if I think of him as here now. You just start to experience them. Or if you actually re-inhabit a caring moment as happening now, it's connecting and meaningful to you, makes you happy to recall. You ever snuggled with a dog or a cat? Re-inhabit that moment now, you'll experience qualities. And those are qualities that then help the mind in the last stage of the meditation to trust enough, to sort of trusting those qualities enough to kind of empower the mind to just relax its grip and begin to let go a little bit more into the source of those qualities, more in the ground or depth of our awareness. Okay, that's the basic structure of what we did. And it's modeled on Tibetan practices. So let me ask you a question. The instruction came in the middle of that meditation when you had your field of care in mind. Instruction said, you are being seen and held in deep care, compassion, acceptance, and warmth, beyond judgments. And relax into this experience, just steeping in its loving energies, feeling its qualities and letting them infuse your whole being. So I assume for many of us, there are also moments of being distracted and thinking about other things, but putting that aside for a moment, in a moment when you felt like maybe you were beginning to settle into that instruction I just said, what was that like? Try to name one quality that you experienced, one loving kind of quality or awakening kind of quality that you experienced when, for even a moment, you felt like, oh, you're actually beginning to settle into that instruction. Try to name one. I bet you can. Yeah. A little louder. Comforting. So a sense of comfort. Thank you. Experience of no self. Yeah. Gentleness. Thank you. Yeah. Real sadness. What else? Yeah. Relaxation. Right. Yeah. Happiness. Good. Yeah.
Felt like some tenderness, and then I felt like a little afraid.
Great. I felt some tenderness, and then I felt a little afraid. So I'll talk about that second part tomorrow. Okay? So right now, the tenderness part we'll focus on. Tomorrow, I felt a little afraid part. And there? Was there another hand up? Felt a little louder, please. Felt at ease. I felt ease and gratitude. Great. There. Feeling safe in having no ground. Okay. Yep. Warmth. Yep. The feeling of putting down your cares, like unburdening. What else? Yeah. Serenity. Great. Yep. Kind of warm liquid radiating from the heart. Okay. Yep. A lot of grief. Sometimes people feel grief because a benefactor they bring to mind has passed away, or because one realizes one has ignored so many of these moments, or many other possible reasons. But the grief can be a really deep thing. Yeah. Being one with myself. Being one with myself. Like becoming more unified, more one with more of what I am. Like that? Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Surrendering. Also mistrust. Yeah. Also not trusting. Great. Yeah. So again, the first part is what we're focusing on right now. Tomorrow, we're going to focus on that second part and try to remember that. Mistrusting, sense of fear came up. Those will be our fuel for tomorrow session. Okay. There's some qualities that others have named in meditation retreats where I've taught this or other kinds of settings. Remember, I'm also doing this sometimes for teachers, social workers, and so forth, but I also do it often in Buddhist centers where everybody's pretty much a Buddhist, Western Buddhist mostly. And then also I do it in settings for Christians or Jews. So in those various settings, some other qualities that were others named were warmth, tenderness, as some you named as well, gentleness, openness, connection, acceptance, gratitude, joy, lightness of being, love, relaxation, spaciousness, aliveness, felt seen, peaceful, grounded, well, safe, felt at home, healing, slowing down, restful, softening, a sense of freedom, release, simplicity. I felt uplifted. It felt like grace. So in Buddhist terms, what I suggest is that these actually are qualities coming from the depth of our awareness, which the ordinary patterning of the mind doesn't permit to come to the forefront. The ordinary kind of ongoing reactive patterning of our mind, kind of holding on to a narrow sense of self, grasping to that, and the world that's constructed around that sense of self, grasping and reacting to that, shuts down these capacities. But when that frame of mind is decisively interrupted in a way that can permit qualities and signals qualities from more of the depth of our awareness to come forward, they can come forward. And it's quite spontaneous. And I think those are qualities of our Buddha nature, actually. It might be mixed with many other things going on in the mind, of course. But nevertheless, the basic sort of substance of that. So the meditation is showing us how immediately we can start to access powers of love, compassion, peace, well-being, discernment, no self, from our Buddha nature. And by hearing what qualities others notice, which is why it's helpful to share with each other, like we just did, it helps us notice more of what we may have experienced but not yet been able to name. So another psychology principle comes up, which is called granularity. The ability to discern more and more finely. And also, as someone said, I don't know how to name this in English, but it's like this. Granularity is the increasing ability to discern more and more finely the kinds of feelings that we're experiencing, even to be able to name them more and more accurately as appropriate. The meditation also purifies qualities of love and compassion toward greater unconditionality. So we may start with a relatively unconditional experience of love with our field of care, like a caring moment when someone was just sort of unconditionally present to us for a moment, even if later on we felt like, oh, but they're not really, fully present to me now. They're not really seeing me now. But at that moment, it felt like they were. So relatively unconditional, not perfect. So we may start with a relatively unconditional experience of love with our FSC, our field of care, but as we follow the instruction, like every part of you loved in its very being, every part of you and your whole world loved in its very being. Instruction's getting quite profound. You've now made contact with loving, caring, compassionate qualities. Now let them become more unconditional is what the instruction is implying. Let them become more and more fully unconditional. Every part of you and your whole world and everyone in it loved in their very being. That also carries a resonance with some really deep parts of Tibetan traditions. In their very being. There's nothing not to love in the very essence, nature, or the very being of what is. So in this way, the loving qualities can become purified, stronger, more unconditional. And the process brings out the unconditional capacity of love and compassion from our basic awareness, our Buddha nature. The capacity of our Buddha nature is for literally unconditional, literally all-inclusive love and compassion supported by wisdom. And from that secure base, it's another psychology term, but from that profoundly secure base, we can bring more unconditionality to others. But without that profound a secure base, a basis anchored in our own being, without that, it becomes kind of impossible to bring unconditional care to others. We're just too brittle. And finally, the last phase of the meditation, just pointing out what the meditation was instructing, that involves just, again, with the help of those loving qualities, that can help over time with repetition of practice, like with refuge practices and intro practices. It can help the mind learn to trust what it's engaging, trust the qualities that it's meeting enough that it can begin to relax with them into the source of those qualities, which is, again, a deeper level of awareness, a basic openness and lucidity or luminosity and tremendous capacity of warmth toward all. Really, warmth toward all in its very being. Okay. So this is a good moment for any questions and also any comments from your experience of the talk I gave and also, or the meditation. Any questions and also any comments or anything you'd like to share from your experience of this talk and the meditation we did. So then back there now, yeah, good, there's a mic.
So I have a question. Hello, my name is Alina.
Hi.
there is people who we can call like psychopaths.
I think you can
who-
hold this a little closer to your mouth.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there is people who we can call psychopaths, people who don't have empathy to other people. Is there some research if this practice could also help them or not?
Do you think this practice could help you?
Yes.
If a practice like this, and basically this is adapted from really deep practices of refuge and bodhicitta, really. So if such practices, this would be kind of an example that's adapted in a way. If such practices really help you more and more and more and more and more, so you become unified with the very ground of these qualities, like I think our realized teachers have. Then you'll be in a position to discern very well when you're with someone who's been diagnosed with psychopathy, what the possibilities may be for that person in kind of some relation to them, sensing what's happening with them and what possible kind of what possibilities are there to invoke their potential, their underlying capacity, which is hidden by psychopathic tendencies. I think that would be my response.
Okay.
I don't have a grand theory of it. It's more like that.
Yeah, it sounds good. Thank you.
Good. So thank you for that. Other questions and comments from your experience of what we've gone over? And back middle.
Thank you so much for the wonderful talk, Lama John. In the beginning of the talk, you mentioned that according to attachment theory, we need to first receive love and warmth to be able to then extend that warmth and love to others. And so I'm wondering, I guess this is pretty similar to the last question, but that like if a person hasn't received love and warmth and feels, or maybe they receive some, but for whatever reason, they tend to feel like very closed off and not able to extend that warmth and love. Like in your view, is it still, I'm not sure what attachment theory has to say about that situation, but in your view, is it then possible through a practice like this to like melt away those layers of enclosure? And despite maybe in early critical developmental periods not having developed with a sense of warmth that extends towards others, is it possible later in life to then melt away those layers and then extend warmth from there?
That's our theory. So it used to be that by and large psychologists thought that what was established in early childhood was established for life, really, in terms of our basic patterns, and that was it. But then just really in fairly recent decades, there was the discovery of what's called neuroplasticity, which means that through repeated behavior or repeated ways of turning our attention with much repetition, our neural system actually starts to change. That is, there are neural pathways that strengthen with repetition. And that kind of opened the door in attachment theory to the possibility of what's called attachment priming, which they then began to do, I don't know, maybe starting 20 years ago. Paul, my partner and all this stuff would know that better. And that is where they were doing a lot of research where they would just ask somebody, just bring to mind someone that you think loved you, or bring to mind a happy memory from childhood, or even just saying the word love and warmth And it would shift a person's attachment style temporarily, but sometimes for quite a while, meaning from more insecure attachment style, it's called, to more secure, like meaning feeling more at home in the world. Isn't that amazing? And then they were theorizing that with repetition, that could actually start to change people. And then Paul Condon, my colleague that I work with in this stuff, that is in bringing psychological theory in relation to the contemplative practice and theory, we really were thinking, you know, practices of refuge are like attachment priming. You wonder why you're supposed to do it 100,000 times? Because it's changing your makeup and starting to penetrate deeply into your psyche. You know, if you catch on, if you have a good sense of it, not just rote repetition, but opening to it more and more, it can really change us. Of course, many practitioners have found that to be the case too. So, yeah, I like that. Yeah, it can. It takes a lot of practice. So when I teach this kind of stuff in retreats, we get to the end of the retreat and I'm like I don't know what's the phrase. I don't know what the international phrase is. Kind of a tough guy. Let's say, so it seems like a number of us really felt inspired by this direction of practice, and that it's really kind of feels like it's deepening for many of us. And a bunch of us want to take it up in some form. But in order for it to really transform us, we have to do it a whole lot. So first thing in the morning, as best we can. And then that's our touchstone for the day. And then there's a whole set of practices that sort of take off from this one, based on this, just like in Tibetan Buddhism, you know, based on from refuge, you go into all the Ngundro, and then you get into other stuff. So similarly, there's just some other things here. It's in the meditation handout. So you do it, at least one of those practices throughout your entire day, actually. That's what I suggest. It's really more than suggesting, because in order to really get the effect of this over time, you'll have to touch in on it. Even if you just do that for like a minute at a time, throughout your whole day. And that starts to kind of imitate what fundamental practices are like in Buddhist traditions, actually. It's not just a matter of a meditation session once or twice or 4 times a day. It's all day, actually. Reconnecting and then seeing how interactions in life are informing your meditation and vice versa, like that. So yeah, I think that could definitely have an effect. Seems. It has for me, I think. I used to be much meaner. Really, it's really true. I used to be much more of a mean person than I seem to be now. Tendencies are still there, but I'm learning how to practice with them. Tendencies to be mean can become a basis of compassion for all those mean people out there. Other questions or sharings? Yeah.
Thank you. It seems that using the yidam practices with
Using the
yidam,
yeah.
with frontal and self-generation,
Mhm.
that you could effectively achieve more or less the same results. And
Well, this is actually modeled on those.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I felt I personally felt a little more it's easier for me to say generate and relate with and then internalize these feelings, say for one reason or another, with doing the yidam practices.
With the yidam practices?
Yeah, that's
fine. Yeah. So this kind of practice for people who are never going to do yidam practices, this is a way to at least for some who are receptive to it, to begin to access, qualities of Buddha nature that Yidam practices bring out. For others who do Yidam practices, some say that this has actually helped them to become more receptive to what Yidam practice can do, made it more real for them. In part also because it pervades their whole life. It's not just a special thing called Yidam practice, a high Vajrayana practice, and it's like a whole separate compartment of life. Turns out your whole life, these qualities of Buddha nature were being embodied in little moments or bigger moments, thousands and thousands of times, by all kinds of people and even also animals. But we are not, generally, at least in the modern West, we're not taught to notice that. That's not important. We're taught to notice other things that can help us get ahead and survive in the world better, we think. So even though that's the case, I think, the more we reflect back and think about little moments, not imposing unrealistic ideals on people that we can't possibly ourselves live up to, about being perfectly loving people all the time. But for most of us, there were moments with our mother or father. Oh, but I had problems with my mother. Okay. I bet there were moments there when there was deep love there. Maybe someday you'll be ready to notice it. It's similar with all kinds of other people. In the course of my own practice life, my entire life has come flooding back at me. People I've known since earliest memories, all the way through childhood, in all of my classes, my teachers, interactions I had, people I ran into, little moments of just care, of laughing with me, or just being present. I've been practicing these kinds of things for years, both Tibetan traditional style and this kind of style. And then one day out of the blue, I remembered Mr. Sorley. He was a camp counselor I had when I was 10 years old. I was a little Jewish kid at a camp that was almost all Christian, and it was a military camp. And they're like Christian military camp people. It's a little intimidating to a little Jewish boy. And then on Sundays, we would go in and the song was Onward Christian Soldiers. So I wasn't sure how to relate to it. Mr. Sorley was Catholic. And he was like kindness embodied. And he just sort of took hold of me and asked me about my synagogue, asked me about my rabbi. He'd heard of my rabbi, this Catholic guy. It was amazing. So he's definitely a benefactor. I don't know where he went. He probably went to Vietnam. I don't know if he's alive, but he's alive for me. So much of that. So for some people, this helps make Yidam practice more real. Oh, it turns out what Yidam practice is pointing to is our entire life. And these powers of love and compassion and wisdom that have been running through our entire life. They're glimpsing at us through the eyes of countless people, countless moments. And we've been that too. It turned out to be about our whole life, not just an esoteric thing called Yidam practice. So some people find that, helpful. Yeah. Yeah.
So maybe just following up on that, when you started the talk, you were basically setting it in a let's say Buddhist context. You said, well, the Buddhas of the past and the enlightened ones of the past.
Because this is largely a Buddhist
Yeah,
audience.
and
so
that's
for
okay.
this,
So
for this audience. Yeah.
and you said you're also basically teaching this to other groups like Jews and Christians.
Right.
So I was wondering if you're talking to, let's say, a group of conservative Christians, who don't necessarily have this idea of this infinite field of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, how would you sort of like base this on or frame this on, and even more maybe specifically wondering if sometimes, well, there's probably not such a thing as a group of nihilists, but if you have the feeling that, you know, the crowd that you're talking to is not religious or spiritual at all, so has maybe a nihilistic tendency, you know, don't believe in anything at all, like Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, Jesus Christ, or whatever, how would you base it? How would you frame it?
So the latter one is not that hard. Even a nihilist may love their mother. We don't need, it's partly sort of related to the Yidam conversation. And by the way, the point of all this is not to do this instead of doing Yidam practice. It's just for some people, this can be helpful, but you don't have to do this. There's no competition there. Even for nihilists, they can understand attachment theory. They might be able to begin to grasp that something quite powerful has been passed down. Like when Tibetans think of their mother or another loving figure like that, what that can evoke. But that's part of our fundamental development as human beings and from evolution. This is becoming part of evolutionary psychology, extremely well established in attachment theory. It's part of the reason I got into all that stuff, to be able to speak to so-called nihilists. But nobody's just a nihilist. Most people, by and large, want to experience what love is like. They want to learn how to be a loving person. Or they may not think that they do yet, but they will, because they have to be well. Then for people of other religions, that's not hard. It depends on what you mean by conservative Christian. I mean, evangelical Christians, for the most part, have not come to my retreats. But a lot of Catholics have, a lot of, I consider very thoughtful Protestants, and some evangelicals. It's happened. And I don't hide the fact that I'm drawing from Buddhism. That's really important to me. I want people to be able to track through me to the sources. At the end of my retreats, I tell them, if you feel really connected to this, then you may very well be connected to one of my teachers. And I name them and how to find them. Chugani Rinpoche, Tsongni Rinpoche, others, Pakra Rinpoche. People need to be able to track what I'm doing back through me to sources behind me. That's part of my mission. And so I always, in retreat, they know where I'm coming from. I'm coming from Tibetan Buddhist traditions, and I make that very clear. But I'm also going to do my best, I say, to, you know, I taught at a Jesuit Catholic university for 25 years. I've been in deep dialogue, and more than just intellectual dialogue, with Christians, some pretty deep Christians, I think, and Jews in those settings. And I'm going to do my best to phrase and frame things in a way that will meet your will. I may not fully succeed at that, but then you can help me. When we have Q&A, that's what I'm seeking. Comments from your experience of all this. And often, if there are Christians and Jews in the room, which is the most common, non-Buddhists to be there, they'll comment from their experience. They'll say, this mapped into this part of, you know, oh, now I mean, one Christian theologian, it wasn't a theologian, but it was a very sincere practicing Christian, said, I feel like I'm really, for the first time, I have a sense of what the communion of saints is through this practice that you just led, John. And you heard the phrasing earlier, felt like grace. And others have said, I feel like I'm beginning to have an experiential sense of what was meant by grace all along, a word so commonly used by Christians. And I feel like I've been empowered by Christians and Jews that I've come to know and have talked about these things with me a lot, and I've shared practices with them. Some of my closest colleagues at Boston College, we've practiced together, and one of them is now practicing also with Tibetan lamas, as well as with me, and is also one of the leading theologians at Boston College, which is one of the leading theological centers of the world. Well, it seems to be okay. I don't hide the fact that I'm drawing from Buddhism, but I'm also going to try to meet you. Yes.
So I hope I put this right. I was wondering how, so it's very different to meet a person like Chukanima Rinpoche or Lama Zopa or whatever, because there's this ocean of wisdom and love, right? So meeting them is very different from like, or remembering them is very different from remembering an ordinary person like my mother, as much as I love her. So I wonder if we can really make people fathom the depth of their potential, even though they have never met with a being like this, like especially atheists. I guess Christians can still do that to practice with Jesus and whatnot. I don't know, but yeah. So is that possible? Because of course,
Yeah, no, that's all these are great questions. That was a great question. That was a great question. All of them were great, and this one is too. The way it seems to work is if someone feels receptive enough to this way, to this way of exploring, and people come to some place where I'm sharing this kind of thing in all kinds of ways from all kinds of backgrounds. Frankly, most of the people I've been teaching the last some years have been Buddhist, but there's also a lot of these other people. And if they enter into it, and if they're receptive, if they have the karmic makeup to be receptive enough to the power of this, there's such immediate access to qualities of our deeper nature. So immediate. Yes, with your mother, who you love dearly, probably in part because she must have loved you dearly. There's a power to that. It softens people up. It starts to open new possibilities for them. In retreat, sometimes I'll talk about my teachers like Geshe Thupten Tsering. Someone may have come in as just an atheist. That's me. That's my identity. Religion's too corrupt. I don't trust any of it. But that's not necessarily, that's a starting point for some. Most who are like that probably wouldn't come to a retreat with me because it involves some vulnerability to just what I led. But still, to some degree, people like that kind of mindset, if they begin to experience the power of the practice, they can't deny the power of the practice. And they can't deny the fact that I learned it from my Buddhist teachers. And I make the parallels to other religious traditions too. There's parallel pattern of practice in other traditions. And I make the link to attachment theory and other areas of psychology. And usually by the end of a retreat, not everyone, but almost everyone is in a different place than where they started from that kind of mindset. That is, oh, maybe there's more to all this than I thought. And that's usually where it goes. I'm not trying to convert them. I'm just sharing along the lines of whoever feels a relation to the sort of thing I'm presenting, they actually come back over the next couple of days of the retreat or the lecture series, whatever it is, something is calling to them in it, then yeah, generally something begins to open for them and they don't just come out with the same rigid mindset that they may have come into it with.
But can we fathom the qualities of Buddhahood without ever meeting a person who embodies them?
Can we begin to access those qualities without meeting a person who embodies them?
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think we have met many, many, many people who embody them partially. It's our Buddha nature.
But not everybody meets the Bodhisattva.
No, you're not quite hearing me yet. Yeah. Mr. Sorley was embodying, from my worldview, he was embodying qualities of his Buddha nature. From within my worldview, that's how I understand what happened there. And it was a real power. It kind of rescued me. Not something clever that he said. It was the quality of his being. So he's a devout Catholic, so he seemed to have learned that in part from a deep practice in his Catholicism. But those are qualities of his Buddha nature. Now, if I'm talking to a Christian who's a theologian, they'll say, but I see those as beginning to become transparent to qualities of God. And that's fine with me. That's what we do. I'm not trying to convert them. But in any case, these different kinds of people, they tend to gain some respect for Buddhism because it's profoundly meaningful even across the apparent boundaries, and can send them back more deeply into their own worldview. Oh, this is what grace means. As if from beyond myself, as you said, no self, a power of love and compassion and warmth, as if from beyond myself. That's a basic meaning of grace in Christian theology. From beyond me, like from God, like from Buddha nature, depending on our worldview. I'm not mixing them up. I just have to stay open to what language which people are speaking so I can speak to them in their own language. That's all. Okay, I think we're at the end. Oh, there was one more, but I'll be here tomorrow too. Okay. Okay, so thank you all so much.